United States of America. There's not a damn thing we've been unable to do once we set our mind to it.
I believe that 2020 is our moment in history. We have been called to dream big, fight hard, and win.
The way we will build the movement to defeat Donald Trump is to call people into our tent, not to call them names online.
What we're trying to do is not just defeat Trump, but is to transform our economy and the way our government does business.
And I give Senator Sanders a lot of credit, but I profoundly disagree with his solutions.
We need you to vote because you've got to vote like your life depends on it, because it literally does.
It is the final debate before the first in the South primary and Super Tuesday. 7 candidates are set to take the stage tonight in Charleston, South Carolina. CBS News and the Congressional Black Caucus Institute are co-hosting the debate. For months, polls showed Joe Biden with a commanding lead. CBS News' last poll of the state back in November showed the former vice president up by 28 points. But in recent weeks, that lead has narrowed. In our newest CBS News Battleground Tracker, Biden's lead is just 5 points. Despite this drop, he's still predicting a good result this weekend.
How do you expect Saturday to go?
Well, look, that's for you pundits to decide. I feel good, ready to go, and I think we're going to do fine.
Do you think Bernie Sanders is the front runner in this race right now?
I'm not going to get, look, you all can, the answer is I'm going to do well here.
But Bernie Sanders is surging after his win in Nevada and looking to build his lead.
You know, given the fact that I have been in opposition my entire career, that I've taken on every special interest, it is a little bit funny to find myself as the so-called front runner. So I'm feeling good, and I think we got a good shot to win this thing.
Let's bring in Maayan Schechter, Sean Sullivan, LaCrai Mitchell, and Caitlin Huey-Burns. Maayan covers the South Carolina State House and politics for the state. Sean is a CBSN political contributor and national political reporter for the Washington Post. LaCrai is a CBS News campaign reporter covering South Carolina, and Caitlin is a CBSN political reporter. Welcome to all of you. So great to see you guys in person as opposed to talking on the satellite. Caitlin, let me start with you. Set up the stakes for us tonight. Who is under pressure here to really make a statement at this debate?
Right. Well, we're here in South Carolina just a few days to go before the primary, but a week from those Super Tuesday contests that we've all been talking about, because that's where the bulk of the delegates are going to be decided. You have Bernie Sanders, I think, coming into this debate tonight with a big target on his back after that really big victory in Nevada, coming off also a win in New Hampshire. In the last debate, his rivals went after Michael Bloomberg instead of him. Does that change tonight? You can expect that many candidates will be trying to take down Bernie Sanders as he is rising. We're also watching Michael Bloomberg, who really had a bad debate performance last time around, seemed unprepared. The campaign says that he's been studying up, that he's been working to do well in this debate because he is making the play for the Super Tuesday contest as well. So those two, and of course Joe Biden, who has called South Carolina his firewall, tonight will be a big test for his campaign as well.
And Sean, when it comes to Bernie Sanders, what new lines of attack have opened up against him since the last debate?
Well, the biggest thing to watch for tonight are his recent comments about Fidel Castro, about the Cuban government. This has gotten a lot of attention. You've seen both Democrats and Republicans heavily critical of this over the past couple of days. You've seen Democrats in Florida, where there are obviously a lot of strong feelings about the Castro regime and about Cuba and about communism, vigorously pushing back against him. He was asked about this last night. He doubled down on the comments that he had made in a 60 Minutes interview over the weekend. So it would be surprising to not see his opponents bring this up as a question that he has to answer. Why is he saying these things about a regime that, you know, broadly Democrats and Republicans agree did not do anything good?
And Maayan, this is the first time in the contest that we're going to be seeing 2 billionaires on the debate stage together. You have, of course, Mike Bloomberg, but also Tom Steyer is back. What potential impact do you think that might have tonight?
Well, obviously, Tom Steyer is on the ballot. Michael Bloomberg is not. So all eyes will be on Tom Steyer, given the impact that he's just had on this state. I mean, he hasn't really registered in national polls, but he's been registering a lot here in South Carolina, not just because of his accessibility here on the ground, but because of the resources that he's been spending.
Ads, so many ads, right? I turn on the TV, all these ads.
Oh, I know, Spotify playlists, you name it. But certainly, Michael Bloomberg has also had a little bit of an impact on this race. It's really interesting. I've been talking to some of my colleagues at the Rock Hill Herald, which is on the border with North Carolina, and there are voters there who think that Michael Bloomberg is also on the ballot here in South Carolina. And he's already started registering some of the polls in South Carolina. So I think certainly we're going to see some back and forth between maybe Biden and Steyer. Steyer kind of picked on Biden in the last debate that Steyer was present at over one of Biden's surrogates, but we haven't gotten to see the double billionaire kind of go after each other with Biden. So that'll be an interesting little back and forth.
Yeah, and LaCrai, let me ask you, because you've had a chance living and working here in South Carolina to see these candidates up close. Let's talk about Tom Steyer, because he was in third place in our last CBS News poll in South Carolina. He had just 2% support back in November. So what really has been making the difference for him here?
Well, Elaine, what was so interesting is even before we saw this bump in polls, people who were here on the ground in South Carolina will tell you that we saw something brewing. You know, he had the people here. To date, he has more than 100 staffers on the ground, so that makes him the largest team here. He's been here about 18 days, 19 days, over 9 visits, and he made it clear very on that he was going to make South Carolina a priority. And you see that when he would come, he would make sure that he brought his campaign, his volunteers with him. He came back for signature events like the Betty Henderson Cook-Off. He came back for forums, and so that sort of presence, you'll hear voters say that helps them feel like they're making a bond with him. And here in South Carolina, relationships are crucial. Anyone will tell you it's all about candidates feeling like a person is there for him. He has made investments here. We mentioned ad spending. By my last count last week, he had spent already over $20 million in ads here in the state.
20 million.
20.6, if I'm remembering correctly. And so he's definitely put in the money, but his team would argue that he's also put in the time here as well. And last night at the First in the South dinner, he said that South Carolina has a piece of his heart now. His wife has moved here, and they said she's going to stay here even after this primary. So it seems that he's really made this commitment to South Carolina, and he, it's maybe we're seeing that now in polls.
So as we've seen Tom Steyer, Caitlin, ascend among black voters, we've seen Joe Biden conversely drop in the polls. How concerning is this drop that we've seen really just since the last few months, over the past 3-4 months or so?
Right, exactly. Since November, Joe Biden's support among black voters has dropped almost 20 points, which is significant because, to LaCrai's point, Tom Steyer has been competing for that vote, and even Bernie Sanders, of course, coming off that win in Nevada, trying to build a broader coalition. What's really interesting to note about Joe Biden is that when he comes to South Carolina, we've talked about this when we've been reporting on the ground here. He is like a different candidate. We followed him a lot in Iowa
How so?
and New Hampshire. It feels more like a homecoming for him here. He feels very comfortable. Throughout the course of this campaign, Joe Biden has always said that South Carolina is where the campaign will really get going. And of course, that's coming off of really pretty devastating losses in New Hampshire and Iowa, and even a second-place finish in Nevada. So he has all along been looking to South Carolina as his kind of saving grace. But if we start to see some cracks in that, and that's why we're looking at his support among African-American voters, with whom he has built up a lot of trust, a lot of face time. He's been here a lot. If that starts to crumble, that does spell trouble for him because he has staked so much in South Carolina.
Sean, let me ask you about Bernie Sanders, because we have seen his support among black voters grow. After these first 3 contests, what does his voter base of support actually look like right now?
Well, his base right now is it's working class voters, it's young voters, and it's liberal voters. But what we saw in Nevada is he expanded that a little bit. We saw in Iowa and New Hampshire a pretty consistent coalition, I think. But in Nevada, you start to see him make some serious inroads with voters of color. You start to see him make inroads with more moderate voters. You're starting to see him appeal to the kinds of voters who a few months ago said, I'm not really a Bernie Sanders voter. I don't know if I can support somebody who's a democratic socialist. The question is how that carries into South Carolina. Right now, when you look at his support among voters of color, it's predominantly young voters of color. Here in South Carolina, there's a lot of older voters of color who matter. what are they going to think about his platform? How are they going to view his performances in Nevada, Iowa, and New Hampshire? But there's no question that as this race has gone on, he has been able to broaden that coalition. And I think we're seeing that reflected in these tightening poll numbers. It's pretty staggering to think about, even 6 months ago, how dominant Joe Biden's standing was in this race, how dominant his standing was among African-American voters. But the Sanders campaign has always had this theory of the case that if you can show people that this staunchly liberal message is one that can win, you can start to win over these voters who used to be skeptical of you. I think we'll see the ultimate test on Saturday.
Maayan, I know you've been reporting on this. How are presidential candidates actually pitching themselves to help down-ballot Democrats win their races in South Carolina?
Well, we saw that on stage at the First in the South dinner last night that the Democratic Party held. They were name-dropping certain Democrats, Jamie Harrison, Joe Cunningham. These are competitive races here in South Carolina come November. And so you'll see every single candidate talk about how they can help those down-ballot races. Look, there's a reason why House Majority Whip Jim Clyburn has been going on the news, and others have been going on the news as well, talking about this impact. Democrats here in South Carolina are concerned. I mean, this is the first time in a while that we've seen competitive races in not just Congress, state House seats as well. There's concerns about party infrastructure. So I would imagine that we're going to hear this candidates ring this alarm a lot on the debate stage. Joe Biden, certainly, he's been pitching his viability as the best candidate to help down ballot races. Pete Buttigieg has talked about that as well. A lot of Democrats that I've talked to on the ground here are frankly a little surprised that this wasn't talked about earlier in the race, that they felt like candidates like Joe Biden should have made this a bigger issue earlier on, that maybe this would have helped bring in some of those undecided voters earlier. But I think that it remains to be seen, obviously. But I think tonight that'll play a major focus, I'm sure, on the debate stage.
And Sean, what level of concern are you hearing from Democrats in the House and Senate about the prospect of a Sanders nomination?
Well, the concern is certainly rising, and you look at some of the key races on the ballot in the fall right now, and you look at the way the Republicans are acting, that tells you sort of all you need to know. Look at Arizona right now, where you have Martha McSally, a Republican in a tough race, already trying to tie her opponent, already trying to tie the Democrats to Bernie Sanders, to his democratic socialist message. You look at Georgia, another key Senate race, you're seeing the same thing happen there. And I think a lot of Democrats right now are nervous because they look at what they were able to do in 2018 and the way that they were able to have success in a lot of these suburban battlegrounds. And the way they won was by running as sort of non-controversial candidates. They ran on what they called these kitchen table issues. They were not out there talking about Medicare for all. They were talking about protecting the Affordable Care Act. And so a lot of Democrats see the 2018 playbook as the way to win again in 2020, and they see Sanders as a departure from that and a potential risk. And a lot of Republicans are really, really eager up and down the ballot to say, hey, if he's the nominee, we're going to go to all these Democratic candidates and we're going to say, do you support Medicare for all? Do you support free college tuition? Do you support a Green New Deal?
Wow, yeah.
These are not the issues that these Democratic candidates have been talking about in these races. And I think that's what's spurring a lot of concern right now in the Democratic Party, how they would sort of maneuver themselves if he is, in fact, the nominee.
Interesting. Well, LaCrai, CBS News has learned that South Carolina Congressman Jim Clyburn is expected to endorse Joe Biden. How much weight does his endorsement carry? Is it a guarantee that it'll go to Joe Biden?
Well, I have to say, I think if you don't have to look much further than how many candidates attended the Jim Clyburn world-famous fish fry back in June.
It matters.
It definitely matters.
A lot.
And it does.
Yeah.
And, because of, like I said, that relationships thing earlier, but also Whip Clyburn is very respected here in the state. His constituents, they trust him. I've talked to him before in the past, and he said he still has people sometimes who come to him days before the election asking for his opinion on what they should be considering when they're thinking about who to vote for. I think the important thing to remember is that just like Whip Clyburn's endorsement is important, there are a host of influential lawmakers here in the state that people have been vying for. And so those are people that we'll continue to hear about as well. But also, voters will tell you that in some ways, long gone are the days where they only listen to those influential lawmakers. Voters are listening for themselves, too. They're trying to see which candidate is talking about climate change, if that's the issue for them. They're trying to see which candidate is talking about what they're going to do in rural communities where they don't have hospitals there anymore. And so I think while Whip Clyburn's endorsement is important, definitely we shouldn't take away from voters making that decision for themselves. When I last talked to his team, they told me that officially he is making his endorsement on Wednesday still, and any other reports are simply speculation. I think, though, that for other reporters that have been here in the state, we've seen Whip Clyburn come to different surrogate events for former Vice President Biden, and they have a longstanding relationship. I mean, last night, jokingly, former Vice President Biden says he's talked to Whip Clyburn every day for the past 8 years. So it's no secret that they have a relationship, and we'll wait and see what he says officially on Wednesday.
Maayan, what is the impact of South Carolina being an open primary?
Well, we've certainly seen a lot of that effect recently with outside Republican groups talking about our recommending to Republican voters to come and vote. We obviously, you don't have to be a Democrat to vote in our primary. But it remains to be seen what that impact will be. I don't want to speculate. We don't know exactly how many voters are going to show up on Saturday to vote in the primary. We don't know how many voters have maybe voted absentee. But with all that being said, there have been efforts beyond just this upstate Tea Party group asking voters to go out. We saw that the Aiken County Republican Party chairman wrote a letter to the editor in the local newspaper, Aiken Standard there, telling voters to go vote for the weakest candidate. So certainly there could be a potential impact. It's just hard to speculate how big of it would be.
All right, something else to watch on Saturday. All right, Maayan Schechter, Sullivan, LaCrai Mitchell, and Caitlin Huey-Burns, thank you all very much.